Okay, so our alphabet cushions are three-dimensional cushions, but the bonus of these are that they actually have the holes in them to give you the realism of the letters. So it just gives them a really professional finish. Not only have you got your alphabet letters, you have also got the ability to do your numbers as well. So all of these are featuring within the instructions, so and the pattern. So yeah, you can make any of those as you want them to. So different variations might be that you're choosing to do it all in one fabric, which you can do. Might be that you've got feature fabrics that have got something that could relate to the education. So bumblebee fabric, so B is for bumblebee. Or it could be that you've got strips, just odd strips of fabric from a collection that you're wanting to use. Piece them together before you actually start, and if you haven't got enough, just add some plain into the back as well. It's one way you can do it with those. And the thing is as well, if you've got just a small amount of fabric and you want that maybe for the front of a character, then you can use your plain fabrics around the outside of it. So you're not limited well, to anything really. And then when you have got them all made up, you can string them together. I've used a thick thread and a dull needle that you can kind of just string all together and then keep them together as one cushion. So yeah, those are our character shaped cushions, and this is how you put them together. So the first thing that you need to have are your chosen letter, and you'll have two pieces. You'll have the front and the back. On this occasion, it's symmetrical, but if you've got a fabric that you're using and you've got a letter that isn't symmetrical, just make sure that you have got mirror versions of the letters so you don't end up with two going in the same direction. You've got a mirror version. As long as you've got your fabrics right sides together when you're cutting them out, then you shouldn't have any issue. On these ones, I've put like a little kind of nick, little mark at the quarter points, and that will help when you actually come to lining up the fabric to go around the outside. And talking of which, in the pattern it will tell you how much of the strip fabric that you're going to need to go through the kind of the whole areas, the outside area. But do also double check just to make sure before you get started. You might have occasions where you need to mitre your fabrics and join them together, like you can see there's a seam there. Hopefully you can see that there. Just to make it a long full run. You don't want to run out part way round. And then it's a case of right sides together, and I start with the internal holes to start with, just to make sure that you kind of that's the trickiest bit really, and it's easy to work on them before you've got the outside edge in place. So the way that I work with that is I start off, and all I'm going to do is place centimetre folded over to the wrong side. Don't need to stitch that in place, and then all I'm going to do is put that and pin it in place like so. Now I don't go on and pin everything else because I just manipulate that under the sewing machine foot as I work. So I'll show you how I do that in the next step. Okay, so I've got my fabric on the bed of the sewing machine, and as I said, anytime I'm working anything dimensional, I'll keep the flat piece, or the piece of fabric that I want flat, with the bed of the sewing machine, and then I'll put the three-dimensional bit sitting on the top. So this is going to raise up as we sew around it. I've also got my 1/4 inch foot on, so as I'm not having a huge seam allowance there, I only want 1/4 inch on there. And I'm just going to get started with my sewing. I'm going to activate the needle down, so as when my sewing machine stops, then the needle will be in the fabric to keep those stitches going. And I'm also going to anchor my threads just by using my tie off switch. So if you have that activated, then that just means that you're going to be able to start off with your fabric secure. Then I'm going to remove the pin because I know the fabric's in place, and all I'm going to do is just take a few stitches at a time. Now it depends on which part of the letter or the number that you're working on, but on this one we're at the tight end of the hole, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate And I'm almost rotating the pink fabric and not the strip. And then again, I'm just going to do a few little stitches, still keeping that 1/4 inch there, and then stopping with the needle down and then rotating and bringing the two back together. Rotating and bring them back together, and you'll notice that it'll start bunching up on the left hand side on this occasion. I'm right handed, so I'm working my way around the centre anti-clockwise. Gets a little bit tighter as you go on. That's okay. Just a few little steps, stitches, then stop. And you can see how it's starting to give it dimension on the other half already. Might be difficult for you to see what I'm doing at this stage, but I'm just literally just working my way around and then pausing and then pulling it round, and then we're back round to where the beginning is. So where you've got the folded bit that's folded over at the beginning, that strip to start with, I'm going to carry on bringing this round, and I'm just going to cut it off, making sure that I've got enough to kind of fold over and then a little bit extra. So I'm just going to cut that out of the way, and I'm just going to carry on as we were, just to the last bit. And then those two, the beginning and the end, are going to overlap. So they'll overlap, but then I'm going to fold that top piece back on itself as well. So it's not easy to see. There's a lot going on in this area. That's going to go underneath the foot like so. So you can see that strip's there. And then all I'm going to do is carry on sewing it. Get my hand out the way so you can have a little look at what's going on there. Okay, can I come around this way? Let's have a little look. And just line up those two where they overlap, and then carry on round, and then tie off your threads. And you'll see that you kind of created that tube. We'll have a closer look at this elsewhere, but what I will show you is, if I move my machine back a little bit, oops, sorry about that, I've almost made it a bit like a top hat, and those folded bits that you've got at the beginning of the end are going to overlap like so. Okay, so those will overlap, and what I will do is actually sew down that seam there. You will have something similar on the outside, but I don't suggest you actually sew down that seam on the outside. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'll show you exactly how it comes together. Okay, so there we go. You see what I mean by it? A bit like a top hat. And what will actually happen is that will fold through to the inside, and then obviously at some stage we will be putting this piece on top, and that will create that center part of the letter. You can snip into this around the edge if you're wanting to. So if you have got a little pair of tight scissors, you can snip into the going around the edge. It just manipulates it a little bit, but do be careful that you don't cut into anywhere that you don't want to cut into. So keeping it away from the main fabric, keeping it away from the stitches. Work your way around. Okay, and then when you're happy with that, you can just give it a little bit of a finger press to make it sit nice and flat. Just use your nail and the heat from that friction just to get it to sit So it'll sit something like that. Okay, so next thing that we're going to do is put the outside strip in place. So the way that we do this, it's the same sort of idea. We're going to start at the bottom, so where that overlap is, we're going to start at the bottom edge down here. So again, we're going to fold over to start with. And I'm just going to make a quick check to make sure that my strip of fabric is going to go all the way around the edge. It's easier to check it at this point than to find that you've run out. So you can see there it goes right all the way around, so there's no issue at all. You're looking at the right side now, and then so that's going to be the right side of the letter, and I'm going to put right sides of the strip together. So always check before you start sewing. And then what will happen is, if I put that in that way around, that will become the side piece. So you can kind of just double check that you've got it right before you do any sewing. And then all I'm going to do is work my way around the outside edge. And just come all the way back round to the beginning. And just make sure you haven't got any gaps in those stitches. Okay, so there we go, back round to where we've got the overlap. So it's starting to take shape, as you can see. So now you can turn it inside out. Now obviously if you've got the hole, you can come to the centre hole there. If you haven't got the hole, it's a solid letter, then you would just basically turn it inside out through that little slot that you've got at the bottom there. If you are going through the hole, just be careful that you don't rip the fabric in the process. So go gently and push everything through so as it's inside out. There we go. So you can see how it's starting to come together. Okay, so I've gone around the edge there and just folded in the edge there, and I've just taken my pinking shears and I've just gone around the outside of the O. If you don't have any pinking shears, then you could just use a small pair of scissors and just snip in. But as I say, pinking shears are good to use. Just be careful. And then all you're going to do is you're going to fold in the edge of your outside fabric, and then the edge of the center. Try and keep it straight, because again you don't want it to kind of skew off to the side. So it's a bit fiddly to start with, because what you're aiming to do is kind of get those edges together and then just pin. So you can work your way around if you want to by putting them in place and then pinning them, or you could just do opposites. So divide it into half and then divide it into quarters. So kind of pull it out a little bit. There's a reasonable amount of manipulation to be done with this little technique. So there we go. So there we go. So stitched around the edge there. You won't tend to notice that anyway once you start adding in your toy stuffing. And at the bottom, see, it's that neat, I can't see it. You've got your little opening, and that's where you're going to start adding your stuffing. It's just regular toy stuffing. What I sometimes do is I use something like a knitting needle just to help me get the stuffing in there. So let's move that out of the way. And then all I do is I take a little bit, so just little amounts, and then push it through the opening that you've got there, and just keep stuffing. Don't try and put too much in one go, because you might find that you do actually split your seam. So obviously just be mindful that you're not pulling at that seam that you've got there. And then we'll just start filling it up. There you go. And then what you can do is just stitch that end piece in if you want to, or just leave it as it is. And there you go. All done.
For some reason I hadn't activated my mic, so here we go. So all I'm doing here is, rather than cutting out the hole in the centre of the character, I'm just tracing it with a pen. It doesn't have to be a heat erasable pen, it could be a regular biro, and just making sure that that's on the wrong side of the fabric, so you can see that that's where the hole would usually appear. And then what I'm going to do is take the main piece of fabric, and then I'm going to use some stabilizer or a lighter weight fabric to actually create the reverse applique. So this is going to sit with the fabric, as you'll see in the next stage, and then you're going to sew through the actual line. So it'll go on the right side of the fabric, and then you'll stitch through the shape that you've got on the reverse.
Okay, so now I've stitched on top of the O shape. What I'm going to do is cut into that. So I'm just going to get my scissors and I'm just going to cut through the layers, and I'm going to go just inside the edge and quite close. I'm going to cut away that. Now if you have got something like your pinking shears, then these are handy, because that means that you kind of get some movement of the fabric. Just make sure you don't actually cut into your stitches as you work your way around, and it just means that when you come to turn it through, it'll be easier to get a nice neat finish. But obviously don't cut into the stitches as you work your way around. You could do it with a little pair of scissors if you prefer, whatever's easiest for you. Okay, and the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take that fabric and I feed it, so the stabilizer, I'm just going to feed that through the hole so as it comes out on the other side, and then that's going to create a window, as you can see. So the idea being is you don't want to see any of that fabric poking through. So I'm just going to take it over to my iron and give that a little press. You can, if you want, use something like best press just to give it a little bit of help along the way. So there we go. So now it's created a nice neat hole, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with my other fabric, and this is the fabric that's going to sit behind. Now it's up to you how big you make this piece of fabric. It doesn't have to be a big piece, but it just needs to be big enough to fit over the hole. So all I'm going to do is going to bring that in, and I'm going to position that over the top to cover it up. And again, I'm going to pin it in place. I'll pin it from the other side though, and then make sure that it's in place. That way around. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and sew just around that edge with a small stitch, just literally just keeping those two together. Obviously if I do it with black thread then you won't see it, so it keeps it nice and neat. But that's I'm just going to use the thread that I've got on, which is a lighter thread at the moment, so you will see those stitches, but it just shows you how you can do that. So there you go. So what I've done is I've stitched it, hopefully you can see that. So that is now covering that hole. So then you just go on and create the cushion in the same way, but obviously you filled it in with a little bit of applique. There is also another way that you can do the applique, and that's when you take just a scrap of fabric and you trace out that line again. So just get some pen and trace that line again. Okay, and then on this occasion I'm going to stitch through the 2 layers. So I'm just using a plain, so there isn't really a right and wrong side to it, and most times you probably would use a plain, but you are going to have right sides together with your fabric and also that kind of stabilizer. Again, I'm just going to sew around the edge, and then all I'm doing is I'm taking my pinking shears and I'm cutting around the outside edge, so close to those stitches but not through them. Okay, and now I'm just going to open these up, separate them up like so. So you've kind of got the back and then you've got the front, and then I'm just going to snip in to the back fabric. So just a pair of scissors. Don't cut sorry, don't cut through the front fabric, it's just that lining or that stabilizer. Just separate them up and just put a little cut, and you can cut outwards. Don't go right the way to where the stitches are though. So just kind of creating a hole in the middle, and then what you're going to do is you're going to turn it inside out. And that's going to create a little piece that we can then use on top of the letter if you didn't want to do the reverse applique technique that we've just shown you. So just going to get a little knitting needle in there just to go round that seam, whoops, to make sure that you've got all the stitching out. Okay, like so. And then just going to give that a little bit of a press. And then what you could do is attach that to the centre of your letter. So I'll turn it over and do it in the centre, like so. Then that is a similar sort of idea, and then you just stitch that in place. So it's a similar sort of idea. That's where you're creating the hole and putting the fabric behind. That one's where you're creating an applique to represent the hole, and then you would pin that and put that in place.